This episode is brought to you by 10 Yetis Digital. We started using these guys at the beginning of the year and we've had great results. They're an online public relations agency that manage influencer marketing campaigns, social media campaigns, design. They do design, and they cover sort of multiple sectors, brands big and small. Highly recommended. That's 10yetis.co.uk. Welcome to the Tech Leaders Podcast. I interviewed Paul Clarke, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Ocado Group, potentially one of the biggest name guests we've had. He's a giant of the UK tech industry. Ocado, one of the most innovative companies the UK have produced, in the last 50 years. So it was obviously a big interview for us, and I was a bit nervous about it, but I need not be. Paul is a really nice guy, easy guy to talk to, and he talks very candidly about his journey. He's been there for nearly 15 years. He's seen the company from startup right through to what it is today. We break this down. We talk about more on-trend tech topics like AI, quantum computing, digital twins, and a couple of other things. And Paul gives us his view on the current situation and what it looks like, what the upcoming sort of roadmap looks like for businesses. Fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed this one. I'm sure you will. It's Paul Clarke, CBE. So Paul Clarke, thank you for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. I've been really excited about this. As we established in the preamble there, I listened to you on the Financial Times podcast. I know of yourself. I interviewed Vishal Chatra from Prowler recently. He was really complimentary about some of the innovative stuff you've done at Ocado. So I'm really keen to get your story. So maybe could you just give us a brief intro and a little bit of an overview of your journey from education right through to where you are now?
Sure. So I suppose by origin, I'm a physicist, and I have a deep love of understanding, how things work, and indeed, I suppose, spent much of my childhood taking stuff apart, and as well as also experimenting with ways to blow stuff up as well. But and that kind of led me to doing physics, and which is all really about the kind of understanding how the world works. But I spent, a lot of my time at university trying to weave as much computing into what I did as possible, having sort of started on that journey at school, and therefore at the end of that, I left and joined the computer industry, and relatively soon, having started with a consultancy, then did a first startup, which is something I always wanted to do. And from there, I've moved through various different bouts of consultancy, startups, interim management. Really, I suppose, trying to avoid working for large companies, because I think once you've done a startup, it kind of makes you somewhat unemployable, because you're used to a level of freedom and ability to control the culture and the kind of people you hire and the mission, and that's hard to give up. And then I joined Ocado in 2006 and found there something very close to a startup, even though it was 6 years old at that point, in terms of its mindset and vision and culture. And we've come on a long way since then, and it's been a roller coaster ride there in terms of all the different things I've worked on there, which perhaps we'll get to talk about. But and I've worn quite a lot of different hats there, and now increasingly I wear quite a lot of external hats too, in terms of industry and government advisory boards. So what the internal kind of mission and agenda within Ocado has now spilled over into something at a more national scale.
What were the key milestones early on in your career with Ocado then?
Some of the things I first got involved in were around what I'd known elsewhere. So, for example, I'd started my career building simulations, mathematical models, in fact, in the defense sector. And one of the early questions I asked when I was, first going around one of our warehouses was, you do model this stuff before you build it? And the answer was no, because we were a startup then, and it was not something that could have been invested in. So that sort of trying to set that right was one of my first areas of focus. So I created the simulation team. I then was asked by our CEO to co-write our first mobile app, which was a lot of fun. I hadn't written that volume of code for quite some time, but that was an exciting journey. I then set up our first part of our robotics function, and so I was kind of managing a portfolio of the unusual and the new, and then became CTO in 2012 and embarked on our journey of building our international platform a couple of years after that. More recently, having handed over the leadership of Ocado Technology a couple of years ago, moved on to lead a new division, the Office of the CTO or Octo, and that's very much focused on the further out kind of research, advanced research, but also going off to disrupt other sectors beyond online grocery and a few other things.
So, well, what did you learn from your startup and sort of SME experience early on then, which helped you in terms of scaling Ocado?
I suppose we were doing something on that first startup I was involved in, which was very disruptive and required us to, make a big leap of faith, about, the future. And I think that's been a recurring pattern, for me, certainly throughout my time, at Ocado, the highly non-linear nature of innovation and disruption, the fact that it's really about, the people, the culture, the vision and the leadership, how to be highly, unconventional, break rules, trusting your intuition, exploiting serendipity. You have to be able to tolerate a high level of mess and uncertainty when it comes to doing what we're doing, and you've got to be able to learn to swim against the tide, to think differently. I often describe, my colleagues' role as being like pieces of disruptive grit in a highly disruptive oyster, and that can be quite, uncomfortable and lonely even at times, because you are always thinking the unthinkable. You're thinking, beyond maybe what most people have on their plates, and you're pushing the boundaries. There has to be a healthy tension there between the here and now and the knitting, if you like, and what you could do in the future. I think over that time, I've built a very diverse network of kind of disruptive people that I like to hang out with. I think that's been absolutely crucial, and I encourage people in my teams to do the same thing. And you need those people to help get you to think in unusual ways, and not just reinforce your current perceptions. And I often sort of describe the journey of innovation as being like an extreme game of non-linear snakes and ladders. Some of the most exciting opportunities do lie at the bottom of the snakes, and the snakes indeed teach you, much more than the ladders do. So you've got to, be willing, to learn, as people often say now, from your failures, but not to view them as failures. And I think it's really about keeping constantly open to new opportunities, because and the whole kind of area of intersectional thinking, looking in unusual places for inspiration and for solutions, because if you look in your own backyard, you'll come up with the same stuff that other people do. And that's absolutely core to, the innovation factory that we have at Ocado.
Brilliant. Well, you come up with some really good analogies there. I particularly like the snakes and ladders one. But I want to go back to you hanging out with disruptive people. I always think of this gang of degenerates who were just anti-establishment. But so talking about that, well, what do you mean? Are you talking about sort of in terms of your social circle, or do you mean in terms of groups you're a member of, or what are you?
When I say disruptive, I mean in the innovation sense rather than the anti-establishment sense. So I mean, but it's about, people who are willing to think big, long-term and disruptively, people who are willing to step beyond, if you like, what seems to be the current received wisdom and vision for the future. And I speak to people in unusual parts of the landscape, which might seem quite far away from stuff that we're working on in Ocado. But every time I do that, even if beforehand I think, crikey, someone said I ought to meet this person and speak to them, they almost always, I realize afterwards, looking back through the telescope the other way, why it made perfect sense, to talk to them, and how it's led to new opportunities. Often, they will introduce me to other people who are thinking unusual things or working on unusual projects, or and from that, you get inspiration, you get ideas that you can take back. Hopefully it's a two-way street. The same thing happens hopefully for them as well. And I just think that's absolutely fundamental in terms of feeding the diversity of thought that needs to go into innovation. And indeed, it's one of the areas where diversity is so important in what we do, but diversity in the wider sense of, mindset, ways of working, experience, ways of solving problems, because we are on a continual path of not just disruption, but self-disruption, and indeed reinvention. And that's a key part of the division I now run, is about how to do that kind of self-disruption and reinvention, and move into new spaces. And so you need to have as many tentacles out there into different parts of the world in order to feed that creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about diversity. I'm assuming when you were growing your immediate team and also your large, wider engineering team, do you often look for people from diverse backgrounds?
Well, I think it's a balance between who you bring into the team and who you connect with, in the outside world. And of course, we have an amazing pool of talent in Ocado, and part of our game plan has always been, whereas many other companies would go off and get consultants to solve hard problems they couldn't solve, we didn't do that. What we did is we went and found more smart people that we could bring into the gene pool, and that meant that we constantly were building our pool of talent and skill sets and competencies to be able to solve problems, for the longer term. And if you're in this disruption game for the long term, that's the kind of game you need to play, and build that capability internally. So yes, I mean, I think often, when we come across, or certainly when I come across inspiring, talented people, we've got quite a track record of creating the opportunity to fit the person, rather than just recruiting. And that leads to the concept of what I often describe as dry stone walling in terms of our culture, i.e., having a culture, growing a culture, maintaining a culture that can accommodate those kind of free thinkers. And that means you have to look for people, even if they might not be people you've hired before or whatever, and fit them in, to the to build these kind of cohesive creative teams. And that's certainly what we've done. At the same time, the nature certainly of many of the problems we're solving means that we need very specialist skills. So we're often shopping for quite rarefied skills in areas like AI and machine learning, robotics, mechatronics, simulation. This is very different from IT, which is why we describe ourselves as a technology business, and why I'm a CTO, not a CIO. But of course, there's a whole IT world that we rely on as well. But the differentiating characteristic is around our technology, and that's really about this cyber physical world. It's about where the digital meets the physical, and what we are doing is basically ideating, designing, testing smart machines at scale, and then getting them out into the outside world through things like living labs, and then operating them at scale, building huge automated warehouses around the world now, 40 to build over the next 4 years. That is at this cyber physical interface, using things like digital twins and synthetic environments to support that journey. That requires a particular breed of talent, and increasingly, certainly in my side of the business, we're often hiring at a PhD or postdoc level, in order to do that, because the kind of problems we're trying to solve require those kinds of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember in the early days with Ocado, I think you guys were seen as being quite. I think a lot of people in the sector that you operate in didn't really understand the value of what you were doing. I think that's fair to say. And then that became apparent more and more as you went on. So, how did you sell the vision of what you were doing in the early days? When people just saw you as this grocery delivery company, but they didn't really understand the value of the data that you were collecting. How did you sell that vision to internally and to people you were trying to hire in terms of what the vision was and where you were going?
So yeah, I sometimes slightly frivolously describe us as being professionally misunderstood. I mean, I think that's because we always had a very clear vision, of what we were doing and how we would use technology and automation to do online grocery scalably, sustainably, and profitably. And that's what we've done, both for ourselves and now internationally with our platform. So that kind of vision has expanded, but a lot of it's been there since the early days, and it's been core to the mission. It's just that we looked like, or we masqueraded, if you like, as being a grocery delivery business, but under the surface, we've always been a technology business, and then we've since become a platform business. And if you dig deeper, you'd see that we've always really been an innovation factory. So it's it has been, as you rightly say, about how to get that story out. And it's why I and others have spent quite a lot of our time telling our story, talking at conferences, being involved in things like this podcast, because there are still I think it's true to say there are probably still people who think, oh, Ocado, they're that online grocery business, aren't they? But I think we've largely won that battle. I think people now understand that we are one of the most exciting technology businesses in the UK of the new generation, and I think that has been crucial in terms of attracting and retaining the kind of quality of talent that we rely on. And it's also been about how we do our technical communications, and it's telling our story in lots of different ways to paint that picture. Because I think one of the amazing things about our business is the fact that we cover an amazing spectrum across that cyber physical landscape, from writing web app and web and mobile applications through to machine learning and simulation, through to real-time control of swarms of thousands of robots, through to writing routing systems to optimize thousands of vans driving around each day, enterprise platforms, cloud. It's a very broad landscape that we are occupying technologically, and that creates an amazing opportunity for people to move around and learn new skills. And contrary to popular belief, engineers don't just run on beer and pizza; they also run on hard problems and the ability to keep learning. And I think, I say that myself as a software engineer, and there's something incredibly exciting about sitting down with an empty canvas, and starting to create a new piece of software. But also there's something incredibly exciting about controlling, machines that move, and analytics and modeling, and and people have the ability. I mean, indeed, we encourage people to move around between areas, including where we can, and where it's practical, letting people have a go at things that perhaps they've not done before. And I think that's what often has led to people staying with us for many, many years, including, I suppose, myself, because there's a never-ending backlog of hard, exciting problems to solve, and that's also what keeps on driving the expansion of the vision for what we can do in the future.
So you talk a lot about the culture of innovation, and obviously your engineers are having creative autonomy to come up with ideas or to solve complex problems. But how do you actually ensure productivity, and how do you ensure that their creative autonomy is pushing in the right direction to aid the cause of the business?
So I think, as I said earlier, I think innovation is all about the people, the culture, the vision, and the leadership. And I think the last two of those is the answer to your question. I think you have to have a very strong, compelling, holistic vision. I think you have to keep maintaining that, just in the same way that you have to keep, doing the cultural gardening to make sure that the business grows in the way that you want it to. And that's an active process, not a passive one. But you also need the leadership, and you need to create the right kind of environment in which people can think big and take risks and have a go at things. But that needs to be a kind of a managed spread bet. You're right. You can't just be off focusing on what the more sort of further facing future stuff. You have to focus on the knitting too. And so we manage that innovation landscape across different time, risk, technology horizons. We have a lot of core engineering teams where a lot of the inline innovation happens, particularly around our Ocado Smart platform, and then we have business sponsored research, which is things like robotics and AI and simulation, and then beyond that we have our advanced research, which is more speculative and is more about what might be investing in future game-changing opportunities, and that's more hands-off from the business, deliberately, because you could otherwise filter things out that you need to be exploring, but which the business might think is a little bit far away from that core knitting. And then beyond that, you've got the kind of spin-out applications, the new ventures that where my division Octo and our corporate development function are focused on, which is all about the future kind of business waves that you're trying to build. I often say that if wave 1 was retail and wave 2 was platform and wave 3 is this kind of spin out and venture stuff, I'm actively thinking about what waves 4 and 5 are, and so that's part of that journey, and therefore it's about managing that, and it's not about those being watertight compartments. You need talent and innovation and ideas and inspiration to flow across, but you do need to approach them as being somewhat ring-fenced to make sure, to come back to your question, that you are balancing, if you like, the risk and investment and innovation across that broad spread bet to make sure that you're progressing on all of those different time horizons. And I think we have the structures in place to do that. And I think we have to keep also constantly evolving and maintaining those structures, because what Christensen said in terms of the innovator's dilemma was just a fact. However innovative you are, you have to keep on making sure that you find ways to see what you can't see. You find ways to reinvent yourself, and I think that's an ongoing process.
Absolutely. So let's talk about wave 5 and wave 6 then, and further down the line. What's in store for the next sort of 5 years, do you think, for Paul Clarke and Ocado?
You won't be surprised if I say to you that I can't talk about that. I mean, I'm afraid,
well, I had to try, didn't I?
It was a nice try, but I mean, but I think, I've hinted at some of that, and we've talked publicly about how, we've built. Well, one way I like to sometimes describe, Ocado's history is as a shopping trip for innovation assets. So what do I mean by that? I mean the data, the intellectual property, the know-how, the technologies and the competencies that we've acquired using online grocery as a vehicle for that shopping trip. And, that's all about moving food atoms around in a very scalable, sustainable and efficient way. But, food atoms are just atoms. And as I've said publicly many times, if you're good at moving food atoms around, which are quite troublesome because they have to keep them the right temperature and they'll squash one another and they have short shelf life and they're irregularly shaped, you actually get very good at moving all sorts of other atoms around. And I think that's part of our journey now. And indeed, that's driving a lot of the spin-out applications that we're focusing on, about things like, the ones we've talked about publicly, sort of massively dense automated car parks, parcel sortation, vertical farming, which we've invested in, rail freight, container ports, all sorts of other things. And what they have in common is it's all about moving atoms around, and it's why slightly, what started as a slightly frivolous tagline in a conference has stuck, which is, Octo's mission is to change the way the world stores, assembles, moves, sorts and sells atoms, and that really is, our mission. it's now kind of spilling out beyond Ocado, because guess what, especially this pandemic, but I think we're learning the need to do that, at a national scale. And indeed, with sustainability in mind, that's something that we need to do at a planetary scale too. So you can take this as big as you want, and I think that's what's really exciting, is the kind of the set of Russian dolls here about how, our strategies fit within, national strategies and potentially, international planetary strategies. But it's all around, using technology and automation for efficiency. It's about using digital twins to optimize, what you do. But maybe I'll stop there and let you get a word in edgeways.
No, it's very interesting stuff, Paul. And look, one thing I'm really keen to find out from yourself is what digital innovation, what technology innovation are you most proud of during during your tenure at not just a CTO, just anything that you've been involved with over your time at Ocado? Which one sticks out for you as being a real triumph?
I suppose putting in place those kind of initial new functions, of simulation, mobile, and our first strand of robotics, which has grown into lots of other strands since then, was key. But I think of those, I'm particularly excited about the simulation side, because that has now grown into one of our deepest core competencies, and it's about simulation, it's about emulation, it's about visualization, and it's about building true digital twins. And unfortunately, the term digital twins is one that's been very hijacked and misused. And for me, what we build are true digital twins, where we take all the data from our physical processes, we put them into a high fidelity model of what we do, whether that be a robotic swarm or a warehouse or a routing system or whatever, and then use that to drive optimization and insights, and then feed that back into the real physical system. And that creates a virtuous circle between the two. And that's what a real digital twin is. And I think that has, that has enabled us to do much of what we've done, both in terms of accelerating innovation, de-risking innovation, trying things out before we build them physically, optimizing hugely complex systems. And then the latest step, which I think is particularly exciting, is connecting AI and machine learning models to those digital twins to find optimizations that humans wouldn't come up with. And I think why that's so exciting for me is because, as I've hinted at already, that has a huge role to play, at a national scale. And it's why the concept of building a national digital twin is something I'm so passionate and exciting about. Shared synthetic environments is very important as part of the gestation cycle, for all sorts of smart machines, not just the ones we build, but the ones that we need for all sorts of purposes nationally. And that's something also that's being focused on. Smart machines don't just burst into the world as mature adults, a bit like humans. You have to create, they have, the end-to-end, if you like, pipeline or ecosystem for them to grow in. Whether you start them off designing them in synthetic environments, and then you move on to emulation, where you start exposing them to aspects of the real world, and then you use visualization to help bring them to life and help people understand their capabilities, and then through living labs, which is all about accelerating in the near real world but in a constrained environment. And then you let them out into the real world, and then you have to use things like teleoperation and haptics to try and step back, which is a bit like as a parent when one of your children who's left home comes back and says, oh, I think I need your help with something. Well, smart machines are just the same. They get into a place where they have to solve problems they've never solved before, and humans have a role to play there. So that end-to-end pipeline for, as I say, innovating, designing, incubating, testing smart machines, is core to Ocado. And I think, a lot of what we've built has been around, that end-to-end pipeline. And we will use it for lots of kinds of smart machines. But as I say, we need to do that nationally, and we need to do it internationally, because smart machines will have a hugely important role to play in solving things like our net zero and sustainable development goals. It's a very big picture.
Absolutely. So I'm keen to dig in a little bit on the national digital twin vision that you talked about. I know the Alan Turing Institute have come out, have been speaking quite a lot about this over the last 12 months, and I know yourself, you've been very prominent about it as well. Well, what problems does this solve, do you think, in sort of in terms of the new post-pandemic world that we're going into, or maybe the pandemic world probably in the immediate term, and then the post-pandemic world thereafter? How does this lend into this, and how does this accelerate the need or the value of a national digital twin?
So, I mean, maybe starting with the pandemic perspective, one of the early questions that was asked was all around, where's all the data that we need to manage this crisis, particularly the real-time and potentially crowdsourced data that we need. And that was quickly followed with another question, which is where are all the smart machines we need to deliver stuff more scalably, to automate configurable manufacturing, to build to manufacture scarce resources more scalably and with greater agility. As I've said already, moving all sorts of atoms around, more efficiently, and as I've just talked about, there's big horizontal digital infrastructure required, to do that, particularly around data infrastructure, but also digital commons for stitching together digital twins. So there's some enabling pieces of the puzzle there to create interconnected digital twins, because they, of course, feed on data. But I think we've understood also from this pandemic the power of modeling, and arguably we probably needed lots of models that we didn't have around human behaviors and our transport systems, our energy systems, our food system. There's a need for as I've said already, much more big long-term disruptive thinking at a national and international level. There's a need for digital infrastructure to support what we now need to build. There's a need for a compelling vision, to drive all of that. But also we need to think of all the ways that, as I say, smart machines can help us. But we also need more systems thinking. We need to see how this is a very complex web of interconnected systems, and you need a deep understanding of how they interrelate, because otherwise, when you start pulling levers, whether it's about intervening, with a pandemic, or whether it's about climate change, you need to pull those levers with a deep understanding of what the knock-on effects and the implications will be. You need to be able to explore what the right kind of lever pulling might be, so to speak, beforehand. And that's where having high fidelity digital twins of the built environment, of institutions, like our health service, our financial system, national and local government, all sorts of institutions and systems, but also our natural environment as well. And when you start connecting, perhaps a model of, part of an aircraft, say, with the rest of that aircraft, with the rest of the aerospace and aviation industry, whether it be air traffic control or airports and airlines and so forth, then you've built a digital twin, maybe of, as I say, of the aviation industry, but that sits within a wider landscape of transport. And then you have to start connecting in things like energy and consumer behavior. Then you're on this journey to building a national digital twin. But it is all about the smart glue to connect those, or the smart language to connect those digital twins together, because no one's going to assemble a national digital twin. It has to be able to be crowdsourced incrementally. And what you see along that journey are all sorts of network effects. As you start connecting digital twins together, you start getting outcomes that you never predicted. And I would perhaps finish by likening this to the journey that we went through with the World Wide Web, where, Tim Berners-Lee went around, in his white van, persuading people, to connect their servers to this thing called the internet, and people struggled to understand why they should do that and what the benefits would be, and it was a leap of faith. And the world we live in, is a testament to that, now. And I don't think people would have predicted, that we'd be sitting on video conferences, during a pandemic. But there's a similar journey there with the national digital twin. You're not going to be able to predict all of the second and third order benefits. There is a leap of faith here, but I think you only have to look at an organization like Ocado to see what those benefits are, because for us, it's absolutely core to what we do, and is true for other companies like Arup and Rolls-Royce and many others who rely on these same kind of technologies. But the point is, we have to lower the adoption bar. We've got to make these kinds of technologies and competencies available to startups and SMEs and researchers, and that's a key part of this. So it's about the national digital twin, but it's also about the incremental enabling steps around building that horizontal digital infrastructure for the UK.
Okay, brilliant. I wanted to move on to quantum computing. I've heard you talk about this in the past. Okay, I know you guys are not building your own quantum computer, but I know you is very much on the radar, and you've talked about it with your team in the past. How far down the line are you with your research into this, and how realistic is it to benefit from the power of quantum computing to benefit your business?
So I think quantum is on a list of technologies that we actively keep a toe in the water in, ones where we know that at the moment the capabilities aren't there to solve our current real world problems. But going back to that kind of innovation spread bet that I talked about before, you can't sit back and wait for these things to become commodities before you start engaging with them, because then you'll be too late. And so it's not, as you rightly say, it's not something which we're building our own quantum computer. That would be positively silly.
Never say never, though, Paul.
Well, never say never. No, I agree. Okay, quite right. Never say never. But I think we've had various different quantum projects where we've been involved with others, who do have access to those capabilities, and that we will continue to do, I'm sure, to stay close to what is a very fast evolving, exciting new technology, which, when it matures, will radically transform the kind of problems that we can solve. Indeed, as other people have said, it's going to be about thinking, what are the right questions, not, that we want to ask, equipped with that technology. And I think it's very relevant for us to stay close to it, from a cybersecurity perspective, but it's also relevant because many of the problems that we solve on a daily basis are, in the mathematical sense, hard. They need this kind of computing power. Many of them lend themselves to a quantum expression, like our van routing, light solving, the optimization of these swarms of thousands of robots that go around picking up. Those lend themselves to a quantum expression, and therefore, we've done some experimental projects there, but at the moment, the number of qubits, just aren't there to solve the kind, the actual problems that we have on a daily basis. But I have, great confidence that they will be, and there are some very big, smart technology companies, working, on that, and it's just a question of time. And we need to be ready for it when it happens.
So, do you think it's a bit of a myth right now? It doesn't really exist, but we will get there at some point. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not a myth. It's there. These machines exist. It's just at the moment they don't have the scale to address the kind of problems that we need to solve on a day-to-day basis. But if you think back to the sequencing, of the human genome, as is well documented, the first 1%, took a long time, and then the last 99% happened very fast. And I think that sort of journey, it is likely to apply, to this technology too, where we will see a rapid acceleration, not necessarily quite as rapid as happened with sequencing the human genome, but I think you shouldn't you shouldn't extrapolate from the first part of that journey to predict how long it's going to take in the future, because there is a potentially an exponential nature to that path, and therefore you've got to stay close to it. And yes, it's important to not get caught up in the kind of the hype, but you mustn't also let that discount the potential long-term opportunity and value in what is an incredibly exciting technology. And there are many other aspects, many other examples of this. AI is another example which gets overhyped, but be very careful not to underestimate it. It happens with technologies like drones. These are all technologies that we're actively involved in at different levels of maturity. For AI and machine learning, it's absolutely core to what we do. We're doing some exciting projects in the drone space, but you have to use these technologies appropriately and based on what their current level of maturity is, and then over time they will mature into other use cases that perhaps you couldn't apply them to in the early days. So it's a kind of a slowly but surely game, but don't let the hype obscure the long-term opportunity.
It's always very difficult to do that, though, isn't it? But I wanted to wedge this one in very quickly because I'm really, really curious. Drones. How are you utilizing drones right now?
So we've used for some time drones for surveying, for monitoring. We use them to fly over our swarms of robots to get to spaces that humans would struggle to get to safely. We will use them rather for things like automated maintenance in those spaces, but also within some of the living lab type applications we're building. We've been focusing on building a living lab in Hertfordshire around this intersection of drones, autonomous vehicles, robotics, smart infrastructure and smart services. And COVID has slightly interrupted that journey, but we'll get back to it. And why? Because living labs is absolutely key to what we do in Ocado, but now we need them at a national scale too. And drones will need to work as part of that smart autonomous landscape with other kinds of autonomous vehicles. So that's the area that we want to explore. And I've talked about how we're about moving all sorts of atoms around in smart, sustainable, efficient, automated, optimized ways. And autonomous smart machines of all different shapes and sizes will be key to that, and drones fit that bill, and therefore we need to stay actively engaged in that. But it's also true that at the moment drone technology isn't really at a point, let alone the supporting infrastructure around automated air traffic control systems and safety and regulation and so forth, to fly 32 kilograms of groceries over your head safely. But as you rightly said, never say never. It's just a question of time, and therefore we will focus on the use cases where we can use drones and where their current capabilities and the regulatory environment support that. But we will also get engaged in the discussions around policy and around the supporting infrastructure to make sure that those future use cases do evolve. And it's why I'm on the Future Flight Advisory Board. It's why I am very involved in things like the National Digital Twin Program, because this is all kind of supporting fabric for this smarter, more automated world that we're hoping to play a big role in building, as I've said already, on behalf of this country, but also because it's going to be really, really important at a planetary scale too.
What technology innovation are you looking at right now with interest? Across any sector or any business, whether it be Amazon, SpaceX, the stuff the governments are doing. Is there anything that you're looking at right now with particular interest?
Well, I think I've talked about quite a lot of that already. I think it's stuff that we're actively involved in. I think it is this smart enabling horizontal infrastructure that's needed to support many verticals and indeed many moonshots. moonshots are very much part of the zeitgeist at the moment, and I think they have a very important role to play in driving innovation, but maybe not for the reasons that people would immediately think of. You know, people often, when you think of a moonshot, people think of the destination, but actually the destination in many ways is less important than the journey, and it is the spin-off technologies and competencies and data uh, and that come out of a moonshot. You know, what in the first moonshot was often referred to as the kind of the Teflon type opportunities that came out. Those are part of the enduring legacy of a moonshot. You know, so you know, it's one of the reasons that I've been saying, you know, we need to choose our moonshots carefully, not just on their destinations, but on the legacy that they will leave us in terms of the enabling Lego. And, you know, we need to think also very carefully about the areas where this country has sustainable competitive advantage, because we cannot do everything. And so we need to think about, you know, where we place our investment in the same way that Ocado does, you know, to best effect, and what will support those visions and moonshots, whether it be institutions, technologies, competencies, skill sets, you know, the implications, you know, for education, which is probably top of my list, and you know, the alliances we form to you know, to build out that vision for a smart, prosperous, sustainable, and resilient UK. And I think you know, we have amazing opportunities as a country, and as long as we build that bold vision and we align behind, you know, the parts of that where we, as I say, we can have sustainable, differentiating competitive advantage, then I think we have an amazing future. And I think although we are living through a period, you know, that is full of kind of horror and challenges and difficulties, I do think we can, you know, use this pandemic to help, you know, build, you know, stronger new muscles that we will need for some of these even bigger challenges that lie ahead. And that's why, you know, I do see uh, uh, some sort of a silver lining, you know, in amongst the current difficulties, you know, and we need to maximize that in order to build for the future and create, you know, resilience to future exogenous shocks that will come our way, like climate change. The ball is in our court, and I think it really does depend on whether we make sure that we do enough of that big long-term disruptive thinking, and that we don't return to short-term thinking as and when, you know, this current pandemic starts to recede.
Absolutely. Well, as Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think we will come out of this pandemic stronger in many ways. But what have you actually learned? What was the biggest lesson you have learned from this pandemic and lockdown situation in the context of Ocado, of course?
Well, you know, when the pandemic struck, obviously many of our staff, you know, needed to keep working in our warehouses, and you know, our business model was, you know, well suited to delivering food, you know, scalably and you know, with you know, the minimum number of, you know, touches, and to be able to help keep our, you know, our customers safe in that process. But and it was largely just scaled up business as usual, you know, when there was a massive peak in demand, you know, for our services. But you know, our researchers and innovators and engineers, you know, headed home, often in my division with 3D printers under their arms, you know, to carry on innovating, and our investment in synthetic environments and digital twins really helped there. But I think, you know, we now need to take that a step further, and I think building, you know, potential virtual labs, you know, that allow not just us, but you know, other researchers and innovators to carry on working, you know, remotely, you know, is going to be important for the future. But it's also not just about, you know, a low touch economy. It's also about, you know, being able to foster wider collaboration, internationally without people having to, physically move themselves around. So I think some really important lessons from this pandemic, it's not just our ability to be on, video conferences. It's really about the fact that there are all sorts of things that we will need from a sustainability point of view to build, but also from a collaborative innovation perspective. So tools for collaboration, coordination uh, at a distance are going to be very important, and doing a lot of thinking about that at the moment. And synthetic environments I mentioned already. So it's a web, but it's much more than just video conferencing. I think now what we need to get on and do is build out that wider picture for innovation. Not just for working remotely in a pandemic, but actually because it will unlock all sorts of new opportunities in less challenging times, especially when people are going to have to fly less, and whether it's to go to a conference, or whether it's to go to a board meeting, or whether it's to go and hang out with fellow researchers or innovators. We need to get better at doing that remotely and immersively, without loss of kind of innovation bandwidth. And I think that's the next sort of frontier that we need to focus on.
Fantastic. Well, I've got one last question, Paul. What I want to do is just pull that back to the sort of entrepreneur who's looking to engage their team and foster a culture of innovation, technology innovation, of creative autonomy. To sort of further their respective causes. What advice would you give to managers, business owners who are trying to replicate the innovation that you've got at Ocado?
It really does depend on your own particular business and history and culture and so on. I think you can look outside, as we have done, and we will continue to do, to how other people solve problems and what their innovation processes are, and what technologies they're cooking with, and what skills they're growing. And I would see those as the kind of the ingredients in the innovation cauldron. But you have to come up with your own recipes that work for you in terms of your culture, your business, your mission and vision. So it's not a one size fits all. And I think it's really dangerous in a way when people overestimate the level of transferability of other people's ways of solving problems and innovating, because they just may not work for you. And it's true even across cultural divides. It's true across geographical divides. What might work in North America may not work in the UK. So but that doesn't mean to say that you can't learn from others. I think you absolutely, of course, can, and at all sorts of levels. And that comes back to why we need to foster ways to do international collaboration and coordination, because some of the problems we face are truly at a planetary scale, and therefore it's not, you can't just innovate in your own backyard for those. And I think that would be, I suppose, my message, which is, by all means, focus on your own backyard and how you can make, your business more innovative, but do keep hold of that bigger picture, whether it be at a national level or indeed at a planetary level, because I think you can, it's like a series of Russian dolls where one fits within the other, and you can have that really big picture, but still focus on your own immediate opportunities and challenges.
Fantastic. Paul Clarke, thank you for your time. It's been very enjoyable. Thank you for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for having me.